Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we'll discuss 7 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From your analysis section, which forms a very important component for the upcoming mains examination of 2026, we are going to analyze two important topics. The first is going to be the provisions of Wetland Conservation and Management Rules of 2017 and the emerging challenges to the wetlands in our country. Then in the second topic, we'll try to assess what is this concept of North Atlantic Treaty Organization Plus and is India a part of it. Then we'll take up mains value addition, where we'll provide you some very important value addition data for the transport sector and the pharmaceutical industry of our country, followed up by 4 particular topics which we'll take up for the prelims purpose, where we'll try to simplify the news for you and also provide you the much important value addition. So stay tuned. So the article highlights the importance of wetlands in natural ecosystem and also argue for a better conservation strategy for wetlands in our country as well as globally. The wetland conservation, which forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the larger theme of environment conservation. So what is the context of the news? Very recently what happened? Supreme Court basically reprimanded the authorities and said that have you people heard about something called as ecological sensitive zone, which is basically designated under the Environment Protection Act of 1986. So Supreme Court, the apex court of the country, it basically gave a directive to the government authorities that this Asan Wetland Conservation Reserve basically forms an important component of such ecological sensitive zones, and thus no mining activities can take place within the 10-kilometer radius of this Asan Wetland Conservation Reserve, which is in the state of Uttarakhand. So various petitioners actually moved to the court. They said, Acha, why this special treatment to this Asan Wetland Conservation Reserve? Is that your first child? Nahi. Then under the Article 14 of the Constitution and under the principle of natural justice, all the wetland conservation reserves shall also get the same protection. Supreme Court said, yes, theek hai, galti ho gayi. This particular provision will now apply to all the wetland reserves across the country for the sake of parity under Article 14 of the Constitution. So basically now it sets up a precedent that any wetland which has been designated as a Ramsar site in our country, no mining activity can actually take place across 10-kilometer radius. Now some of you, while celebrating this particular idea that yes, indeed it is going to lead to a large scale environment conservation, also keep this in mind that there are approximately 100 wetland sites in our country. That basically also implies that there will be a large scale decline in mining activities. Thus, our critical mineral exploration and excavation is going to be compromised, and thus manufacturing output is going to be declined as well. So there is always a two edge to the sword. Please keep this in your mind. Now let's in this context try to understand what are these Ramsar sites. Ramsar sites are basically the wetlands which are designated as one of the international importance under a convention called as Ramsar. Ramsar, which is basically a site in the country called as Iran, and this particular Ramsar Convention was signed in the year of 1971. The fateful day was the day of 2nd of February, which we now celebrate as World Wetland Day. The theme for this year was Wetland and Traditional Knowledge, celebrating the cultural heritage of certain communities. For example, you people might have heard about a particular tribe called as Apatani tribe of Arunachal Pradesh, which basically inhabits the Zero Valley. And they basically have a kind of a cultural tradition passed from generation after generation to actually preserve the wetlands. Now some factual facts, like for example, which was the first Ramsar site to be designated under Ramsar? That was Kaburg Peninsula in Australia. The convention ultimately came into the force in the year of 1975 with UNESCO acting as a kind of a depository, and in our country just 6 years down the line, Chilika Lake and Keoladeo National Park were actually declared as the first two Ramsar sites in our country. Keep this in mind that this Chilika Lake is also recognized or considered as the largest brackish water lagoon in Asia. and it is the only site from our country which was actually included in the Montreux Record. Montreux Record is a specific initiative under the Ramsar Convention for spatial conservation purposes of certain wetlands which has been degraded up to a kind of a very abysmal level. However, Chilika Lake was removed from Montreux Record in 2002 after large-scale restoration project of the wetland was taken place. Keep this in mind. Now, when we have understood that acha theek hai, there are certain wetlands which are designated under this Ramsar Convention of 1971, the idea is what are the classification? How do we classify a wetland under the Ramsar Convention? So, following the rules and mechanisms of Ramsar, our country also created certain specific rules, like for example, Wetland Conservation and Management Rules of 2017. Now, very recently, there was also a petition which was filed in the Supreme Court, where the petitioner Ravindra Sinha basically alleged that how the definition of wetland which has been provided under the Rule 2, Clause G of the 2017 law, that actually stands inconsistent with the Ramsar Convention. Because the Ramsar Convention includes both natural and any kind of artificial wetland which has been made by the men, whether it is permanent or temporary, but without any specific distinction. However, under the Wetland Conservation and Management Rules of 2017, our government has basically kept certain areas out of the ambit of protection under the Ramsar. So let's try to understand what it includes and what it does not include. So any area of marsh, fen, peatland or water, whether it is natural or artificial, whether it is permanent or temporary, is actually considered to be a wetland. Now keep this in mind, what is peatland? Peatland is basically a specific type of a wetland, right, where there exists partially decomposed organic matter, which basically is called as peat. And this partially decomposed organic matter has actually been formed over a period of more than 1000 years in waterlogged and oxygen deficient condition, where such peatland also act as one of the world's largest terrestrial reserves of carbon dioxide, or they act as one of the largest carbon sink. One very famous example of such peatland in our country, which you people can think of very easily, is the Fumdis you might have heard about. Fumdis or peat, which is actually created in the Loktak Lake. Loktak Lake is in the Kebul Lemjao National Park. Kebul Lemjao National Park, which is basically in the state of Manipur. Also remember, if in this lake of Loktak, which is also a Ramsar site, it doesn't matter that water is static or flowing. The water is either fresh, brackish or salt. Even at the coastal area where there is a marine water, the depth of which at the low tide, not high tide, low tide does not exceed 6 meters, is actually included in the definition of wetlands under the rules of 2017. However, there are certain exclusions as well. For example, any river channels, any particular field which is actually being considered for the cultivation of rice or paddy fields, or for example, human-made water bodies or tanks, right? So let's say for example, you people actually kind of dug up a lake. Can that be designated as a Ramsar site under the rules 2017? The answer is no. Or any structure which is created for aquaculture, salt production and irrigation, all of this will not be included under the definition of wetland, so that it can have a kind of a provision of protection that is backed by rules of the government. Keep this in mind. Thus, it excludes water bodies constructed for drinking water, irrigation, salt production, as well as paddy cultivation. The petitioner said that this exclusions actually ends up weakening the existing legal protection which is provided to the wetland, which is the need of the time, and moves substantial majority of wetlands from the protection framework, and that has been one of the major reasons for the large scale wetland decline in our country. Now when we have understood that there are certain arguments which is being kind of put in the front of the Supreme Court, and this wetland conservation is a very hot topic, we need to also understand what are the importance of wetland for environment conservation. So let's try to understand the ecosystem services which are provided by these wetlands to us. The first and foremost is that these wetlands are nothing but the sabji mandi, the large scale sabji mandi for various varieties of flora and fauna. Take it. So let's say, for example, we were discussing about the Loktak Lake in Manipur. In Loktak Lake in Manipur, there might be already existing a large scale flora and fauna. When this flora and fauna dies or succumbs to death, they are basically converted into organic matter by various kind of microbes. And this organic matter is called as detritus. Now these detritus basically act as a kind of a food source for the flora and fauna at the first level of food chain. Like for example, it can act as a food for small fishes or insects. Then these small fishes and its insects act as a kind of a food source, right? Consumable food item, just like Lay's packet, for the next level of food chain. Like for example, it can be birds or reptiles. Thus, don't you think that the presence of such wetland itself creates a kind of an extensive food chain, and thus they act as a kind of a biological supermarket? That is why one of the reasons that these particular wetlands are one of the most preferred areas for the birds who actually take the migratory route across Central Asian flyway, which also appeared in your this year prelims examination. Like for example, there is a bird called as Amur falcon, which basically starts migrating from the temperate region. It actually stops at a very specific wetland called as Dayong wetland in the region of Nagaland, the largest water reserve of Nagaland, that is Dayong wetland. And that is why Nagaland is also considered as the Amur falcon capital of the world. Some of you might be thinking, what is this Central Asian flyway? So for example, let's say this Amur falcon, it comes from a temperate region. But when the sun starts moving towards the Tropic of Capricorn, this temperate region actually faces very harsh winter. And thus, to avoid itself from such extreme living condition, the Amur falcon start tracing the movement of sun and start moving southward, taking the path of a Central Asian flyway. And when the sun will rise up to the Tropic of Cancer one more time, the Amur falcon will return back. That is the idea. Second, let's say for example, there is a river, and that river is overflowing right now. Okay, some flood has taken place. Now just within the vicinity of that, there is a low-lying wetland. So this low-lying wetland actually acts as a kind of a source of water accumulation for this overflow of water, and thus kind of maintain the ecological flow of rivers, acting as natural sponges against this kind of a surface water runoff, thus kind of playing a very pivotal role in the flood control also. Third, let's say for example, when this water was overflowing from the river, large scale excess nutrients or sediments which the river has kind of accumulated over its path, this large scale excess nutrients like for example phosphorus, nitrogen, etc., they start flowing into the wetland. So now this presence of already the flora and fauna, they look at these excessive nutrients. Sometimes the heavy metals like for example cadmium, lead, nickel, etc. They look at this, they are like Malik, जब इतना खर्चा हो गया है, एक एक्स्ट्रा पैकेट चिप्स ले ही लेते हैं. And thus they start absorbing these excess nutrients for their own consumable food and for their own growth, and thus absorb it, and that's why they are considered as the kidneys of the earth. Another question which appeared in your prelims examination. Second, we were already discussing about the peatlands, how they act as kind of one of the world's largest terrestrial carbon sinks. That's why these wetlands also helps in carbon sequestration. Keep this in mind that zooplanktons, which are actually kind of available in these wetlands, they absorb carbon dioxide 55% times or 55 times more faster than any tropical rainforest, like for example Amazon. Then large scale presence of fishes, birds, small reptiles, etc. Large scale livelihood creation can be created around these wetlands. They provide various kind of economic services, like for example your sustainable livelihood is there, right? Your livestock farming can be done in these wetlands. These wetlands can also act as a kind of a tourist destinations, thus diversifying the economic portfolio of the region itself. Now you people can quote these particular terms and specific examples in your answer and establish that conservation of wetland is of paramount importance for today. But what are the causative factors for large scale wetland loss in our country? For that purpose, we are basically going to refer to this Wetland Extent Trend Index 2025. According to which, the first and the most primary reason for such wetland loss is obviously the anthropogenic pressure, the human economic hunger, in the form of urbanization and encroachment. So while we are kind of patting our back that yes, indeed, now almost 40% of our population actually lives in urban cities, and by the year of 2050 this particular percentage is going to rise further up to 50%, we need to understand that these cities, they have a limited capacity to hold such large scale population. The population which has already become 1.4 billion plus, making our country the most populous country in the world. So as the population is rising, as the people's aspirations are rising, as they are seeking, kind of high scale life, high quality lifestyle, for that purpose they are seeking good job, good infrastructure like healthcare infrastructure, education infrastructure. They are rampantly moving to the cities. And now to sustain these people, you basically need lands to create what? To create industries, to create housing for them. For example, you have various schemes already into the function. Pradhan Mantri Amrut Yojana, Awas Yojana. For all this purpose, you require a very basic necessity, and that is land. And if you have the shortage of that, what you start doing? You start basically covering these wetlands itself. Just look here. As per the DU, kind of Geographical Information Survey based study, 70% increase in the built up area has taken place in Delhi in approximately last 3 decades, and that had led to loss of 97% of wetlands which used to exist in Delhi. Second, large scale pollution sponge. So for example, large scale untreated sewage, industrial effluents, fertilizer runoffs and solid waste dumping actually takes place in these wetlands. Just look these data here, which people can also quote if it comes to the contamination of river in your mains examination. Just see, almost 35% of urban population generates almost 65% of the wastewater generation, of which only 28% is treated. Just look at the large scale extent of river pollution in our country. The identified stretch is 351. Just look at the number of polluted stretches. Just look also at the shortfall of the kind of sewage treatment capacity which we have. In the cities with 10 lakh population, there is almost a shortfall of 66% treatment capacity. And thanks to this large scale anthropogenic pressure, thanks to this large scale pollution dumping which is being done in these wetlands, just look at the loss of wetlands which has been done, and the loss of wetlands also leads to large scale economic loss. Keep this in mind and quote this specific data, that how there is a loss of more than $5,100 billion in the terms of loss of wetlands in the span of last 5 decades. Just look at the cumulative loss from coral reefs, seagrass, estuarine waters, tidal flats, mangroves, river and streams, lakes, etc. Your peatlands. Quote these data. Give a specific case study of Sakhya Sagar in MP, where the untreated sewage flow actually led to large-scale algal bloom and water hyacinth outbreak, also leading to, if we connect it with the One Health concept, large-scale disease spread among the people. Also, this increasing population pressure and global warming, it has led to what? 30% wetland loss has taken place across the country since 1990. Decline of 81% inland wetland has taken place due to the lack of water inflow. And that has resulted in what? Loss of ecosystem services. Almost a loss of $76,000+ hectares in a particular year. Then such large scale land use change is also taking place due to the expansion of agriculture, because again, if the population is increasing, you will obviously feed them. Then there is a large scale noise around the nutrition as well, the concept of hidden hunger as well. For that, you are basically increasing your agricultural productivity. When you are increasing your agricultural productivity, again you need the land. So let's say, for example, if you are doing actually large scale rice cultivation, that's why you have kept actually river channels out from the ambit of wetland protection. That is the idea. Also, because of the climate change effect. So if the droughts will take place, or if the extreme weather events take place, the drying up of such weather, kind of wetlands can take place. Many of the time, the hydrological alteration also takes place. Why? Because of the diversion due to the dams and canals, and thus the kind of the surface water runoff which used to fill these wetlands, these water had been entirely diverted, and that has led to the large scale drying up of wetland as well. Remember that these wetlands which provide a source of livelihood. So it is not only going to impact the environmental aspect of it, but also the fishing will get impacted. So it will lead to large scale economic loss as well as large scale employment loss as well for people. The aquaculture will get impacted. The tourism of that particular region can also get significantly impacted. So considering these issues, there are certain global level efforts as well as certain efforts which has been taken by the government of India, which will basically form our way forward and steps taken. First and foremost, there was a conference of parties 14 in which there was a preparation of 5th Ramsar strategic plan, under which there was an idea that there is going to be a collaboration between the public as well as the private bodies for the large scale rejuvenation of the wetlands. The idea was to align it with the goal which we have taken under the UN decade on kind of a ecosystem restoration. The idea is to at least restore 30% of the degrading wetland by the year of 2030. Taking up this idea, there is a kind of a freshwater challenge which has been launched in the countries like Colombia, Ecuador and Zambia, where they are kind of rejuvenating these wetlands with large scale community participation. Remember that thanks to the extreme weather events, such large scale cloudburst event became a kind of a very recurring phenomena in China. And to tackle with that, China actually started creating large scale blue spaces in its cities, and thus creating a concept of spawn cities which can also be implemented in our country. Then as per the United Nations Earth Assembly, the kind of a specific adoption of lake and natural based solutions can be done. Our government has also taken the cognizance. It has basically launched Amrit Dharohar scheme. Okay. What is Amrit Dharohar scheme? So under this scheme, the government is basically encouraging the optimal use of wetlands, enhancing the biodiversity, carbon stock, as well as ecosystem opportunities around such wetland. Let's say for example, Loktak. Second is your Misty scheme. It basically deals with the mangrove plantation across the coastal area. The idea is to cover all 11 coastal states which we have plus 2 UTs to actually kind of grow mangrove in more than 540 kilometer square area. These mangroves who are actually going to act as a kind of a natural barrier against any kind of impending cyclone or storms, for example. You can also use the same scheme in your disaster management when you are talking about as a kind of a natural solution to deal with such disaster. Third is your Mission Sahbhagita, which basically talks about the community-led participation of, kind of doing a social engineering to promote them for mangrove conservation, where these particular, like the people who are getting involved, they will be provided some certification, they will be provided some recognition, right? The various government ministers, including our Prime Minister, can actually applaud them, can actually talk about them in Mann Ki Baat. All of this can actually bring the youth for such a large scale preservation of wetlands in our country. Now, some specific facts for prelims which you need to keep in your mind. These are some specific sites which were included last year. Okay? So these are the recent ones and they can actually appear in that table format. Also, India has now 99 sites, Ramsar sites. So it has surpassed China. The largest Ramsar site in our country is Sundarban. The largest Ramsar site in the world is Nigiri Nadombe Wetland Complex in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The smallest wetland in our country is Renuka Lake in Himachal Pradesh. The state with the most Ramsar site is Tamil Nadu, followed by UP, and the country with the largest number of Ramsar site is UK. Keep all of these facts in your mind. Look at this PYQ very specifically and then this question. Try to attempt them and we move forward to the next news, where the editorial argues that for India, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization transformation is very less about Europe than it is about the redistribution of American strategic attention. Attention to where? Attention to the very important economic region of Indo-Pacific and to the challenges which has been posed by China, which has emerged as the world's second largest economy and has actually posed threat to US hegemony as a superpower. The issue which forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the larger theme of impact of policies of developed and developing nations on India's interest. So first and foremost, let's try to decode the news. What has been the shift in the functioning of North Atlantic Treaty Organization? What is the context? The context is that for the first time since the formation of North Atlantic Treaty Organization as a security bloc in the year of 1949, Washington is now asking Europe not merely to spend more on the defense, but also to assume its primary responsibility for its own security. So basically US is saying that see, since the formation from 1949 till the year of 2022 when Russia-Ukraine war started and we put heavy economic aid as well as military aid to you, we have been towing down the huge burden of your security. But now it is the high time that you take the responsibility of your own security. Increase your own defense expenditure as a percentage of your budget. And thus it marks a fundamental shift in the transatlantic compact and signals the emergence of a new phase in the alliance evolution. There are basically three phases of evolution which has been suggested by the today's editorial, which we are going to discuss one by one. Let's first try to understand that how US is shifting away from the sole military backbone of the Europe. A great example of that is reflected in the National Security Strategy of USA, which was released in the month of November 2025, where it was again recognized, right, on theoretical basis that yes, indeed, North Atlantic Treaty Organization is US principal transatlantic alliance for sure, but US also made sure to highlight that how it is actually has taken the large-scale burden sharing of security of Europe for decades. And thus, the collective defense responsibility lies on the shoulder of each and every 32 member nation. Where USA highlighted that how in the year of 2025, USA ended up spending almost $967 billion when it came to the defense expenditure, while the European allies in total, including Canada, spent $506 billion only. So for example, if we consider NATO as one security bloc, because obviously there is a provision that if you attack one member, basically you are against the war or you have waged the war against all the members. So just like how, for example, there was this Prince Paris who ended up capturing the Princess Helen. And because the Princess Helen was captured, the entire Greek declared war against the city of Troy. That is exactly the principle of NATO here as well. US is saying that let's say in total, if we are spending $100 of NATO, $65 is being spent by US alone. Thus, from the year of 2014 itself, there was a kind of a Wells Summit target which was set on the European nation that please start increase your defense spending to at least 5% of your respective GDP. However, if we look from the year of 2014 to year of 2025, the cumulative increase which was actually achieved by these European nations who are member of North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the cumulative increase as a percentage of their GDP was hovering around an abysmal 2%, which is less than half of the actual target itself. USA is saying that see, now it is the time you should become Atmanirbhar Europe. Self-dependent Europe, so that we as a country can actually devote our greater strategic attention to the region of Indo-Pacific, which has now become much more strategically important for us thanks to the rise and dominance of China in the region. Now a question might be appearing in your mind. What is this North Atlantic Treaty Organization? What was the need of the creation of it? Let's try to understand that thing first. So you people are very well aware that how there was a capitalist model of economy which was actually propounded in theoretically by a book written by Adam Smith called as Wealth of Nation, which was published in the year of 1776, which also provided a kind of a economic background for the American Revolution, which took place from 1775 to 1783 and ultimately led to the establishment of the oldest democracy in the world. The idea is that through this book, a model of economy was basically suggested, which actually worked on the principle of laissez-faire. That was that there shall take place free trade between the country, which shall be only, kind of dominated by the forces of demand and supply and not any external factor like state. Second was that this particular model of economy, capitalist model of economy, will have the least state intervention as possible. And this model was successfully implemented and executed and became a kind of a model to follow, as showcased by the large scale economic development which was achieved by USA or which was achieved by Britain through industrial revolution. And they basically emerged as the kind of the global economic powerhouse at that point of a time. However, there was a drawback of this capitalist model as well. That was that it basically led to large scale concentration of wealth as well as land. It led to large scale wealth inequality and poverty among the people. A very great example of that was the large scale poverty which existed in our country itself. Thus, there was a large scale section of society which comprised of workers, you can say the gig workers of that point of a time, the laborers, the agricultural tenants, the farmers, who were deprived of a meaningful livelihood, which ultimately led to the development of a kind of an antithetical idea to the capitalism, which was propounded in Das Kapital by Karl Marx, which actually became a model to be followed by the leader of October Revolution or Russian Revolution, and they were Stalin and Lenin, where Lenin basically gave a kind of a political program during the October Revolution of 1917 to all the workers, soldiers and peasants, where he promised that I am going to actually bring a large scale land reform. I will actually, kind of relieve the peasants from any kinds of debts which they have. They will actually be made the owner of the land, right? And there will be a large scale worker control over the industry, where they will have like basic provisions like occupational safety, minimum wages, kind of a specific working hours, etc., etc. That is basically termed as the Bolshevik Revolution, which basically adopted the socialist economy model of Karl Marx, leading to a kind of a planned economy model which is propounded by the state itself, and 5-year plans which were implemented by Stalin in the USSR. But anyway, the capitalist model is already famous. It's already working. Why any country will basically leave it? The idea was Great Depression which took place, where the global GDP it actually shrank by 15%, trade fell by 50%, and it caused a massive unemployment of 25% in global economy at that point of a time. However, the Russian economy was least impacted by the impact of this Great Depression, which actually brought a new idea into the forefront, that an economy which is controlled by the state, where there are industries which are directly controlled by the state, it can actually still manage a kind of a subsistence level of employment in the economy, so that the propensity to consume by the people, remains intact. And that also, kind of inspired a lot of leaders in our country as well. Just to simplify this for you, because we have a shortage of time, try to understand this, that there exists a company. The company gets to know about a very new phenomena, that is artificial intelligence. It says that if we work on the principle of profit maximization, why? Because we are nothing but capitalist company, and we work on the profit maximization formula, and we integrate this artificial intelligence into our factor of production, then we do not need to pay wages to, let's say for example, 5 men. Take it. The total cost of AI adoption is of 1 man, and we can thus lead to the job layoffs to these 5 men. So basically, this particular capitalist is actually going to incur a large scale profit, is actually going to live a rich life. However, there will be a large scale job layoffs, poverty and wealth inequality which will actually take place in the economy. Versus, let's imagine that this particular company is actually owned by a state which basically functions on the socialist model and thus has a directive principle of state policy, that is Article 38, which basically establishes the state as a welfare state. Thus, the state exists for the welfare of the peasants, workers, laborers, etc. Thus, instead of like this company, instead of just going for large scale AI adoption, it will actually start training the workers in artificial intelligence so that their job is sustained as well, and their meaningful livelihood is also sustained and ensured. That is the model of socialist, where the key industries are controlled by the state, and that was exactly what was propounded in the Karachi session of 1931, which was basically presided by a very prominent person. You people have a small job, just comment down at this particular instance who was the president of the Karachi session of 1931, where for the first time a national economic plan was propounded, including certain fundamental rights. Then ultimately the World War II took place, which ended in 1945. And these two economies, USA driven by the capitalist idea and USSR driven by the socialist idea, both of them came out as victor. Now the Stalin's idea was to actually kind of spread this socialist model of economy and one party rule to various Eastern European countries to create a kind of a strong political bloc, thus leading to a kind of a birth to an ideological rivalry, where there were certain countries which sided with USA, which basically believed in the functions and the principles of capitalist as well as democracy. And then there were certain other countries who believe that if we want to eradicate large-scale poverty which is prevailing, large-scale wealth inequality, where the power as well as the economy is concentrated in the hands of very few people, leading to monopoly and oligopoly of the industries. For that purpose, communism and one-party rule is the solution, as it was adopted by China also under Mao Zedong. Thus, there was a wave of fear in Western Europe and USA, that this whole policy of laissez-faire, which shall work on the principle of free trade, demand and supply, that is going to be eradicated. Why they are so fearful? Because at that point of time, they are the largest producer. They want certain markets, underdeveloped markets, to be open for them, right, for their products. And that is going to be closed if they start adopting this socialist model. Thus, there were certain specific conferences and instances which ultimately led to the backdrop of the formation of North Atlantic Treaty Organization. If you people have to write this in the mains examination, just create this flowchart. First was your Yalta and Potsdam Conference of 1945, where Roosevelt, the president of USA, Churchill, the president of UK, and Stalin, they ended up dividing Germany into the occupation zone. So Germany was divided on the line of Berlin. Certain areas went under USSR, where it started adopting the model of socialism, and certain areas basically went to the other Western European nations and USA, where they started implementing the model of capitalism. Thus, Churchill actually recognized the prevalence of such two different ideological kind of blocks in Europe through its Iron Curtain speech, which he gave in the month of March 1946, where he said that yes, indeed, there are certain states which firmly believe in democracy and the principle of capitalism, and they have a kind of a responsibility to kind of create an Iron Curtain to kind of prevent the spread of such communist ideas. This was further propounded with the Truman Doctrine. Truman was the next president of USA after Roosevelt, where he said that there shall be a policy of containment against the communism. And thus, a Marshall Plan was launched in the same year, where USA provided almost $13 billion aid to various Western European nations, thus already strengthening the idea of economic and political cooperation. Stalin took a step where it led to a kind of a blocking of all the roads from the other European countries, which led to the part of the Berlin which was under the occupation of USSR at that point of a time. To the next side, the other Western European nations actually ensured kind of air supply at that point of time. And thus the Western European nations came to a conclusion that if we have to stop Stalin and the spread of communist ideas to the Europe and engulfing its market-based economy, then there is a need of collective defense alliance, and that was the backdrop which led to the kind of formation or formulation of North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is an intergovernmental military alliance between 32 member states, 30 European nations and 2 North American nations, that is USA and Canada, where it has a very specific provision, that is Article 5. Remember the story of Troy and Odyssey. And that is Article 5, which states that an armed attack against the territory of one member shall be considered an attack against them all. It is headquartered at Brussels, Belgium, and has official language, that is 2, French and English. The idea is to deter and counter the threat which was posed by the USSR, which ultimately diluted in the year of 1991, which formed the rival Warsaw Pact in 1955. Keep this in mind. The editorial today suggests that how there existed three phases of North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The first is NATO 1.0, which is obviously the Cold War era. And during the Cold War era, our country basically adopted a very simple principle, that is non-aligned movement. Our country basically acted as a kind of a mother between the two warring brothers. We said we will not take any sides. We have our own issues to deal with, right? Large scale poverty, deindustrialization, large scale land accumulation by certain people, the privy purses of the princely states. बहुत दिक्कत है, ठीक है? You people fight among yourself. So during this first period, these European nations, they relied overwhelmingly on American military and nuclear power to actually deter the Soviet aggression under the Warsaw Pact of 1955. So for example, at that point of a time, almost 2.5 to 3.5 lakh troops were permanently stationed in Europe. The USA at that point of a time funded the air forces and the naval bases in the Western Europe, funded almost 25 to 30% of the common budget of North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And that's exactly what they are saying in their recent strategy, that we have taken the burden of your defense for almost 7 decades. Okay, now it's time that you take the charge of defense in your hand. We have other problems to worry about. Then there came a USSR president whose name was Mikhail Gorbachev. And he brought two kind of policies. One was perestroika and one was glasnost. So basically the kind of political reforms he did and the economic reforms he did, where he kind of opened a certain section of economy of the USSR for the rest of the world, that ultimately led to the bifurcation of USSR, right? Various countries, got independence like Romania, Poland, etc. And thus Russia, kind of now became a mixed state, a socialist plus capitalist economy state. Thus, USA started incorporating various earlier Warsaw Pact members into the provision of North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Remember that it was during this period that first time the military intervention was done by NATO, not entirely during the Cold War period, but first time in the Bosnia War of 1992, because there was a UN mandate. And this Article 5 has been invoked only one time till now, when there was a 9/11 attack which took place, which obviously shook the conscience of the world. And thus USA basically launched a war against terrorism, in which all the NATO countries basically, kind of supported it, leading to the invasion of Afghanistan. Now, after 2022, that is Russia-Ukraine war, we can actually see that how the US attention is actually moving towards the region of Indo-Pacific. That is something which we are going to analyze. How we can prove it? Just look here, how the troops has been brought down to a number of 75,000 to 80,000. Or for example, just look here. In the 36th NATO summit of 2026, the various European nations actually pledged $70 billion for war. Right, the Russia-Ukraine war. But there was no such separate pledge which was made by USA. What is the problem which actually lies, which has actually led to the Russia, kind of invading the region of Ukraine? And why Russia is still fighting this bloc, which has almost become redundant thanks to the dilution of USSR in the year of 1991? There are certain security reasons. First is the membership of countries like, for example, Ukraine and Georgia. Now to understand this, look at the geography of Russia. So Russia basically shares boundary with a sea which is called as Black Sea. This Black Sea has certain states like, for example, Bosphorus and Dardanelles, which ultimately connects it to the Mediterranean Sea. Okay? So Russia do not have access to Atlantic. Russia have a limited presence, that too quite northward when it comes to Indo-Pacific. Okay? Russia do not have any access to the entire Indian Ocean. So the very important sea for the sea-based trade for Russia, for its supplies also, is your Mediterranean Sea. And thus a very important reason is Black Sea. Which countries share borders with Black Sea? So just remember a mnemonic, that is Black Bloc, Roru, Tuge. So that is Bulgaria, Ukraine, Romania, Russia, Turkey and Georgia. Now if Ukraine and Georgia, the two boundary nations of Black Sea, becomes the member of NATO, and thus they side with them in the case of war and ends up blocking the entire Black Sea, don't you think it will become detrimental for the interest of Russia? That's why Russia's actually, protest against the Ukraine's accession to NATO, because it is an unacceptable security threat due to the shared border and strategic importance. But at the same point of time, let's say for example, we are Ukraine and we say that, NATO seems good. Okay, their people also seems nice. We have a strategic autonomy. We are a independent and sovereign country. We can join any bloc we want. But Russia's threat and pressure, don't you think, act as a kind of as a kind of a detrimental to the sovereignty principle of Ukraine? Okay. So they are basically saying that no third country has a veto over NATO's open door policy. Then these two countries' membership also marks what? NATO's eastward expansion. Enlargement is a voluntary choice by sovereign state, which they are seeking collective security. Russia says no, it will lead to violation of various political assurance which was given to Russia during the World War II. Further, NATO's military presence in Eastern Europe and the kind of the increase in the defense budget, Russia said it is a direct military threat to us. And because it's like USA is trying to increase its sphere of influence. And thus Russia say that we seek to preserve a strategic buffer zone and oppose the NATO's expansion into countries that are part of our traditional sphere of influence. Keep this in mind. So why suddenly USA is kind of diverting away from this very important transatlantic security partnership which it has? The reason for that is the China's dominant rise, where China has emerged as the world's second largest economy with 30% global manufacturing output. Right now, China is the largest trading partner of more than 120 plus countries, where the future industry, Industry 5.0, which is going to be based upon artificial intelligence, machine learning, kind of your data-based intelligence, data-based policy making, for which you require what? These machines which are you can see actually functioning around you, which actually functions on what? Semiconductors, which require what? Critical minerals, who have a kind of a absolute command over the excavation, exploration and the processing of these critical minerals. That is China, is actually dominating almost 60% processing of critical minerals. Further, China has increased its sphere of influence just following the US model through various kind of regional and intercontinental blocks, like for example Belt and Road Initiative, your BRICS which India is part of, your Shanghai Cooperation for which India is part of, where it has also kind of boosted its defense and military infrastructure, where it has become the world's largest navy by the number of battle force. It also has a nuclear triad and is establishing or is trying to push its dominance in the region of Indo-Pacific through the string of pearls strategy, where it is trying to encircle our country, as well as 9-line. One of the students had written a very good definition of 9-line in Hindi in the comment box in one of the recent Analyst. Now, what is the importance of Indo-Pacific then? Indo-Pacific, which right now contains almost 65% of the world's population and thus has the world's largest labor force and consumer market for the future, where it contains some very important kind of choking points, like for example Strait of Hormuz, Gulf of Aden, Strait of Malacca, through which passes 60% of the global maritime trade, 80% of the global seaborne crude oil trade, as well as if you want to establish your sphere of influence when it comes to critical minerals and semiconductor supply chains, the dominance over Indo-Pacific and to curtail China's dominance in Indo-Pacific becomes important, and that's why USA is basically deviating from NATO. But very recently, it was also trying to seek India's participation into it. So the headings like these started coming. Huge potential for India if it wants to collaborate with NATO, said by NATO Secretary General itself. However, our External Affairs Minister very clearly said that see, NATO template does not apply to India, we are sorry. Take it. Then there were articles that how India shall actually refuse America's NATO plus bid. So what was this NATO plus? The idea was that India shall also become the part of NATO. You are already our strategic partner. You are already a member of Quad also, and a quadrilateral security dialogue. Why don't you become a member of NATO, NATO plus? It will actually enhance your defense cooperation in the region of Indo-Pacific. It will help you to win the strategic competition which you are having with China. It will also increase your security umbrella and your role as a net security provider in the region of Indo-Pacific with the kind of technology cooperation, defense cooperation which we'll have. India said that see, there are certain issues. First and foremost, Russia has been our strategic partner since Indo-Bangladesh war, Indo-Pakistan war of 1971, which led to the liberation of Bangladesh, right? And it has actually helped us time and again, right? Where it has, like, let's say for example, if there is any resolution which has passed in United Nations Security Council, being a permanent member, Russia has curtailed it. It also moderates a kind of a very strong stand of China if it wants to take against India. Or let's say for example, if we become the member of NATO, and then let's say for example in the future, if there takes place a war between NATO and Russia and China as one bloc, and they together fight with each other, where China is going to actually put the first attack. That is going to be the first point of contact, because we are the only country which share the boundary with China. Thus, we have actually maintained a kind of a much more balancing act which comes with NATO. We are signing free trade agreements with European Union. We have emerged as a kind of a largest trading partner of India, right? European Union, when it comes to specifically the export of merchandise. As per the CIPRI report of 2025, almost 30% our defense imports which we are doing is actually from Europe. 13% we are actually doing from USA. So remember that now, if let's say for example the European Union is actually going to increase its large scale defense expenditure, and they are going to make much more defense equipments, don't you think they are also going to pressurize India to buy that defense import? At the same point of time, we are also doing the balancing act when it comes to Russia also. 40% defense import still comes from Russia. Almost 33 to 35% of oil import, crude oil import, is actually coming from Russia despite the sanctions from European nation. We have also tried to, let's say for example, support Russia when it comes to the de-dollarization of the economy through Vostro accounts. So basically, we are trying to manage both the blocks. We are still following our ideology of non-aligned movement. And thus, our overall doctrine is actually driven by the larger idea, and that is Vasudev Kutumbakam, and that is the whole earth is one family. UPSC already asked a very interesting question on NATO in 2023. 3 years have passed, a very probable question is on the line, and we move forward to the next news. Where, as per the Research and Development Statistics of 2025 released by the Department of Science and Technology, India's spending or research and development. So earlier we used to quote this very obsolete data. That used to be that India only spends 0.6% of its GDP on R&D. Now update your data in the mains examination. Now we have spent almost 0.8% of GDP when it comes to research and development. Also update your data. Almost 45% of this expenditure has actually been come from the private industry. Keep this in mind. The article basically highlights that how two important sections, that is transport and pharma and biotech, they have actually emerged as India's biggest research investors. So whenever you people will be writing about the roadblocks which exist in the manufacturing sector, or why our manufacturing output is not significantly increasing, we can actually kind of quote the Logistic Performance Index 2023, which is released by the World Bank, where our country had a kind of an abysmal ranking of 38 out of 139 countries, even though we improved from our earlier position of 44th in 2018. So this Logistic Performance Index, which is released by the World Bank, it basically kind of assess a logistic performance of a country on several key dimensions, like for example custom efficiency, quality of export and import, logistic services which are provided, as well as timeline of delivery. Our highest ranking was actually in the terms of international shipments, where we ranked 22nd. But keep this in mind that this particular Logistic Performance Index also provided a very interesting data, according to which, let's say there is a developed nation like for example China and USA, and let's say there is a product which is being sold there at 100 rupees. So this is MRP, and MRP includes basically your all factor of production. One of them is transport from the kind of the place of origin to the place of sale also. So this logistic cost in such developed nations like China and USA, which are the largest and the second largest economy of the world, it is hardly 7 to 8 rupees or 7 to 8% of it. However, in our country, the economy of logistic is almost 14% of the total cost of MRP we actually spend in the transportation itself. So logistic still remains expensive in our country. That leads to the high cost of products, and that obviously kinds of determine or dilutes the overall demand of that product. That is one idea. So again, our government is taking kind of rampant steps in this direction. We are doing, let's say, development of infrastructure in Northeast under PM Divine. We are creating roads in rural areas under Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, right? There are national highway plans. So through all of this, or for example, dedicated freight corridors, through all of this, we are basically trying to improve our logistic, which will bring down the cost of it, and that will actually make the product much more affordable and increase their demand. Okay? So that's how we link the entire concept. Second is, remember that we are the pharmacy of the world, right? We are third largest when it comes to the pharmaceutical products production in the terms of volume, and 11th largest in the terms of value, where we produce more than 60% of the global demand for the vaccine. Almost, like 20% of the global supply of medicine and vaccine is provided by our country, and we sell pharmaceutical products to more than 200 countries. The projection of the industry is that the industry is going to achieve almost $130 billion of exports by the year of 2030, and the industry itself will emerge as $1 trillion industry by the year of 2047. So to actually maintain this status that we are the pharmacy of the world, the government has taken several steps which can actually act as a kind of a one table which you people will create as a steps taken when it comes to the pharmaceutical industry. The production linked incentive scheme for complex generics and high value added medicine. 100% foreign direct investment is actually allowed through automatic route. We are creating bulk drug parks for specialized industrial zones. As per NIPER, there is advanced research in biopharma and repurposed drugs which is taking place. And we have also very recently amended the Section 83 of the Patent Act to actually promote research and innovations in various kind of biotechnology products. Remember this way forward for pharmaceutical industry. Remember these issues which lies with the transport sector, which is also a very integral component of the entire manufacturing sector or MSME. Any question comes, at least point out one issue, that is going to be LPI and the logistic cost. And we move forward to the prelim section, where we'll quickly try to understand that how the election of United Nations Secretary General actually takes place. Okay, it's very interesting. So first and foremost, try to understand this, that United Nations, which was actually created on 24th of October 1945, has 6 parent organizations, right? First is the United Nations General Assembly, where all the members of United Nations, all 196 members, they come, they discuss, they pass resolutions. So the main policy making and representative body with 193 members, it actually takes place. Then there is United Nations Security Council, which is basically given the charge to maintain the international peace and security, and it has 15 members. 5 are permanent members, of which one is Russia as we were discussing, and 10 are non-permanent members. Then there is United Nations Economic and Social Council, which basically ensures coordination and policy review on economic and environmental issues. There exists Trusteeship Council, which provides international supervision for 11 trust territories under 7 states, like for example Palestine was there. Then there is your International Court of Justice to resolve dispute among the member state. And then there is UN Secretariat, which basically includes the UN Secretary General and the staff members who carry out day-to-day work as it is mandated by UNGA. So now the election of the next United Nations Secretary General is actually under the process. Why it is in the news? Because United Nations Security Council held the poll for choosing the next Secretary General of UN, UNSG. The election provision has actually been provided under Article 97 of the UN Charter, which says that United Nations Security General shall be appointed by UNGA. Appointed by UNGA. But voting is taking place where? At UNSC. Why? Because this appointment by UNGA can only take place after the recommendation of UNSC. Keep this in mind. What is going to be the term of UNSG? It is going to be the 5 years, and it will start from the 1st of January 2027. So there are basically 15 members. Okay? 5 permanent, 10 non-permanent members. The vote is required 9, that is 60%. So if 60% of the member agrees that yes, ठीक है, इस आदमी की शक्ल अच्छी है, इसको next UN Secretary General बना देते हैं, and that's how the majority is actually set up. Now keep this in mind that the voting takes place under secret ballot, right? So that that person doesn't feel bad that why, let's say for example, Russia or China did not voted for me. Thus, the slip doesn't disclose the name of voting member state. Right? So when I'm voting, it is going to be simple that I look at this person, I'm like, encourage. Or I look at this person, I'm like, nah, discourage. Or I can leave it entirely blank. Okay? Now let's try to understand this. ठीक है, 5 are permanent members, basically the victors of World War II at that point of a time. ठीक है, USA was there, UK was there, USSR or modern day Russia was there, China was there, right? So all these countries, they basically form the part of the 5 permanent members. Then there are 10 non-permanent members, which are again elected by UNGA now. Now to again get elected, the candidate must receive at least 2/3 of all the vote cast. What if it becomes a case of a tie? So for example, in 1979, Cuba and Colombia both withdrew for Mexico as a compromise candidate was selected. Then in 2016, Italy and Netherlands, they both share the term for 1 year each. So what is the term of a non-permanent member? That is again 2 years, and everything starts from 1st of January. Keep this in mind. 5 members are replaced every year, and a retiring member is not eligible for immediate re-election. Okay? So again, 3 of these seats are actually reserved for African states. 3 of them are reserved for Asia Pacific. 2 of them for Eastern European state. Latin American and Caribbean have only 2 seats, and Western European and other states have 5, out of which 3 is already reserved. That is France, UK and USA. Ye clear? Some important functions of UNSC. First and foremost, it empowers the council to act as a mediator in international dispute, to seek solution through mediation, negotiation, arbitration at certain instances, enforceable action to determine any threat to the existence of peace. UNSC is the only body which can actually impose sanctions or authorize military forces. Keep this in mind. Also, under Article 52 to 54, it can deal with peace settlements of local dispute through regional organizations like, for example, NATO, African Union, Arab League, etc. And it also has a responsibility to protect population from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, crime against humanity. But yes, obviously, if let's say, for example, US is invading the region of Venezuela, obviously to establish democracy there, then United Nations Security Council will close its eyes. ठीक है, मैंने नहीं देखा, है ना? Ultimately, how does the voting works to take any decision? So as per Article 27, affirmative vote of 9 or 60% of the member is required. Abstention is not regarded as a veto, though all 5 permanent members must vote for adopting any amendment of the UN Charter, as well as the procedural matters cannot be vetoed as well. So if there are some procedural matters, they cannot be vetoed. Okay? Again, there is a large scale issue of reforms of UNSC which also is being driven by India. India is also, kind of debating regarding it, demanding regarding it. A very prominent question for this year mains examination as well. Keep this in mind, and we move forward to the next news, where we'll try to understand that what is going to be the new interest rate, right, as it is going to be propounded by the Monetary Policy Committee of Reserve Bank of India. First and foremost, what is this inflation, targeted inflation rate? What is Monetary Policy Committee? Let's try to understand all of that by simply developing one understanding, and that is what is retail inflation. Retail inflation is basically the rate at which the general price level increase over the past 12 months. Okay? So let's say, for example, if 1 year before you bought an iPhone for 100 rupees, okay? I hope, I wish, है ना? So this year, let's say if the iPhone is the same iPhone is actually being made available to you at the price of 110 rupees, then it is said that the inflation is 10%. That is the idea. So the article today highlights that how, as per the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, the retail inflation rate is set to breach the Reserve Bank of India's target level of 4% of retail inflation. So what does inflation rate of 4% implies? That now if the iPhone was 100 rupees last year, so 12 months down the line, right now it is 104 rupees. Okay? What are the causes for this 4% inflation rate? Okay? Why it is going to breach that much? First, fuel or energy inflation. Okay? So remember, we are an import dependent country, either for crude oil or for LPG. Okay? So again, if there is a supply chain bottleneck which was created thanks to the West Asian crisis, it's very obvious that the supply of these things were basically, kind of curtailed down. Hana? Now again, try to link it with the logistic performance index. So if there was a truck which was moving from the region of Himachal Pradesh, basically, kind of taking apple from there and exporting it to the countries, it was basically consuming what? Petrol and diesel. Now, if the cost of petrol and diesel is going to increase thanks to our import dependence and the supply chain bottleneck, don't you think that the cost of Apple is going to increase as well? As simple as that. Second reason which is actually showcased in the today's newspaper is the impact of climate, and that is we are basically facing a El Nino year this year, where there is going to be a loss of precipitation or less precipitation in comparison to the previous year, and because of that the agriculture productivity is going to decline. Okay? So if the supply is going to be impacted, obviously the inflation will take place. Second, increase in the cost of substitute good also. So let's say for example what happened that if the LPG became so expensive, okay, obviously I started eating one time a day as it was suggested to me by my prime minister also. Okay. So then what I started doing, I let's say for example went to other substitutes of cooking fuel. But because this particular fuel has risen up so much, even their prices increase. So that also led to large scale, kind of house-based consumer expenditures, survey-based inflation which took place. Then there is a large scale effect on transport or logistic inflation as we have discussed. So what was the overall impact on Indian economy? The high cost of goods and services obviously lead to decrease of the propensity to consume, ultimately lead to the less demand for product, and thus less profit incentive for the companies, thus less incentive or requirement for the factors of production, less employment level, less salary, the propensity to consume further declines, and thus it creates what? A vicious cycle of inflation-led large-scale unemployment in the country. Second thing, how we calculate inflation. So when we are talking about this retail inflation, keep this in mind, it is calculated on the basis of consumer price index, where the price changes from the perspective of retail buyer, that is you and me. Okay? Where it includes goods and services, however, in wholesale price index, only goods are included. So obviously when we are, let's say, if we talk about our overall consumption in a day, okay, most of it is basically revolving around what? The various food needs which we have. Hai na? Coffee in the morning, simple vegetarian food in the afternoon, okay, some snacks in the evening. So the weight of food item is 36%. Who releases this consumer price index? National Sample Survey Organization under the Ministry of Statistics and Planning. The base year has been recently revised to 2024. And the Monetary Policy Committee, when it is actually setting up a specific inflation target, it actually uses this consumer price index data. Keep this in mind. Now look at this CPI inflation, that how it is basically creeping around the RBI's inflation target, and that is of 4%. Okay? And now how it is going to shoot up beyond that. Again, at the same point of time, if you see, the repo rate has been come steadily down over the year. So the point is, across the months. So the point is, what is repo rate? Repo rate is basically the rate at which the Reserve Bank of India give loan to the bank. Okay? So let's say for example, I am Ambani, which I wish, and I go to the bank. The bank is the State Bank of India. I say I'm launching a project in Kenya and I require some 10,000 crore rupees. SBI says, oh, okay, I don't have that much of money right now. Let me go to the Reserve Bank of India. It goes to RBI. RBI says, see, there is large scale inflation in the market right now. Take it. If I give you money and you give to Ambani ji and he creates such a large scale project, large scale employment will be created. Too much propensity to consume, too much money supply in the market. And thus the product demand is also going to shoot up very high. And that will lead to further inflation which will not be able to control. No, I cannot give it to you. So earlier, let's say if I was giving to you at the rate of around 5%, now the chances is that RBI will increase the repo rate. So it will actually become costlier for the SBI to take the loan. So SBI calls Ambani ji and says that 10,000 is too much. Can I give you 5,000 at this much interest rate? You understand? So increasing of the repo rate overall, right, over a period of time will actually lead to what? Kind of decline in the inflation. Now, what is the inflation targeting? So, inflation targeting is basically done under the Finance Act of 2016, which amended the RBI Act of 1934, where inflation targeting basically act as a kind of the primary objective of the monetary policy. There is a specific target range which has been set, that is 4% consumer price index, right, 4% inflation rate, which the Monetary Policy Committee or RBI shall maintain. But there is a kind of a tolerance band, and that is plus minus 2. So even if it goes up to 6%, ठीक है, it is fine according to RBI. Even if it comes down to 2%, it is fine according to RBI, and the ideal rate is 4%, around which the inflation is right now. So chances are that RBI is not going to significantly increase repo rate or decline repo rate or something. But then RBI also has, or Monetary Policy Committee also has, an accountability clause. That is that if it fails to keep the inflation within the band for 3 consecutive quarters, that is 9 months, then it will report to the government about the reasons and the remedial action. This Monetary Policy Committee, keep this in mind, consists of 6 members. 3 members are from RBI, that includes RBI governor itself, the deputy governor and RBI official, and 3 members comes from the government as nominated by it. Take. What will be your suggestion to the Monetary Policy Committee if in the future you are actually a nominee of the government in Monetary Policy Committee? You people can actually take this comment section as a very kind of an innovative box where you can actually put such innovative ideas, and also kind of get a reflection about what other students or aspirants are thinking about such issues. ठीक है, थोड़ा सा productively उसको use करो. Coming to why the band of this 2 to 6%, because it is high enough to incentivize the producer to produce more and earn profit. At the same point of a time, low enough to sustain a continuous consumer demand. Also, there has taken place a lot of economic shocks in last 6 years, like pandemic, Russia-Ukraine war, West Asia crisis. So it is kind of feasible to maintain a sustainable inflation rate. This year, there is a El Nino year, keep this in mind. Further, it will lead to what? Supply shortage, so rise in food inflation can take place. It will reduce the farmer income also, and thus they will have less propensity to consume. And at the same point of time, if there is a high inflation, it can actually lead to large scale sinking of demand, consumer demand. So that's why such healthy tolerance band of inflation is required. Keep this in mind from the means purpose. And we move forward to the next news, where we'll quickly try to understand what is Fugitive Economic Offenders Act of 2018. Why it is in the news? Because as per Union Home Ministry, India has brought back 274 fugitive criminals from 36 countries over the past 7 years. And as per the article, it was said by the Home Ministry officials that the previous governments, they basically lacked the political will to bring back fugitives, while the government today has made extradition of fugitives a national priority. Okay? So very soon you people will see Vijay Mallya attending a RCB match. Okay? Maybe, who knows. So who is a fugitive economic offender? It is basically defined under the section 2, right, subsection 1 clause F of the Fugitive Economic Offender Act of 2018, where, let's say for example, if I am a person and I have done a fraud of total value which involved is 100 crore rupees or more. Okay, I took the loan from State Bank of India of 100 crore rupees. Next day I booked the flight to the London. Okay, and now the authorities are searching for me. So I have basically left India to avoid the criminal prosecution. How such particular person will be recognized? That will be done by a special court. So basically the enforcement directorate will go file an application before a special court, and special court under the act and the specific provision will basically declare me as a fugitive economic offender. Now how I can be brought back to India? Just look here. The fugitive Mehul Choksi challenges extradition in Belgium Supreme Court. Okay. So basically there are certain provisions. First is, if I have a kind of a bilateral agreement with that particular country, I have already signed an extradition treaty. So remember that India has signed extradition treaty with almost 48 countries. Or if there is an Interpol red corner notice, or if there is a mutual legal assistance treaty, or if there is enough diplomatic pressure and asset freezing which has been done. So under India, the extradition of such fugitive economic offender is actually governed under the Extradition Act of 1962, which basically establishes a dual criminality principle, where such an offense can be extradited only if it is crime in both India and requesting country. Keep this in mind. So it applies to foreign state with which India has extradition treaty, like for example with Bangladesh, and certain non-treaty state, but that will be done on the basis of reciprocal arrangements. So that was also taking place when, for example, Sheikh Hasina fled Bangladesh and came to India. So this was the issue, that India and Bangladesh have extradition treaty, which allows extradition based on police warrant without even requiring full evidence. But Sheikh Hasina has still provided asylum by India. India said that, see, it can be refused under certain conditions. For example, what if offense is political in the nature, or there exist chances of unfair trial? है ना? It can lead to the compromise of Article 21, that is right to dignified life of Sheikh Hasina. And Article 21 is actually available to both the foreigners and the citizens as well. Keep this in mind. And we move forward to the last news of the day, where we'll quickly try to assess the immunization program of our country. What is the context? The context is a hexavalent vaccine. What is a hexavalent vaccine? So Ministry of Health has said that introducing a hexavalent or 6-in-1 vaccine into India's universal immunization program could actually improve the efficiency of childhood immunization. Okay? To actually kind of make sure that the child mortality rate actually declines. Now, what kind of 6 diseases can be cured by this one vaccine? So hexavalent vaccine is combination that protect infants against diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis. What we did, we basically created a mnemonic that is going to be DTP, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis. Then hepatitis B will take H, polio we take P, and then from Haemophilus influenza we basically take HI. So basically hexavalent vaccine provides treatment or cure against DTP plus HPHI. Okay, just remember this. Now there was this expanded program on immunization which was launched by World Health Organization, which specifically increased the coverage for these 3 things: diphtheria, pertussis and tetanus. Coverage increased from just being 5% in 1974 to 85% by 2024. Smallpox was entirely eradicated in 1980. 99% polio eradication, right, has been achieved, and now it is endemic only in 2 countries. One is obviously our dear neighbor Pakistan, and the other is Afghanistan. Then you guys can also recall the global vaccination effort for COVID-19. The whole idea is to achieve the immunization agenda by the year of 2030, where World Health Organization aims to reduce 50% the number of children who are missing out on vaccine, achieve 90% coverage for essential vaccines given in childhood and adolescence, and introduce 500 new vaccines in low and middle income countries. And following this agenda, India has launched its own universal immunization program. Take it. The idea was to actually create an expanded program on immunization in 1978, which was limited only in urban areas. But then it was renamed as Universal Immunization Program and expanded beyond the urban areas to rural areas as well. It works as a central sector scheme. Some of you may argue that, sir, how it is possible? Because public health is listed in the state list, that is true. But then there is a entry 29 of concurrent list, in which union can also make a law. And one of the very important is prevention of contagious disease from one state to another. As per Ministry of Health Welfare, 3 crore plus pregnant women and 2.7 crore plus newborns annually has been vaccinated. Under this, remember, 12 vaccine preventable diseases, right, are cured at no cost, or the vaccine is provided for them. Okay. So nationally it is available against diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, DPT, polio, measles, rubella, rotavirus, hepatitis B, meningitis, tuberculosis, pneumonia, and subnationally against the Japanese encephalitis. Okay. Remember all of these important details for your prelims examination. And with this, we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation, and thank you.